Alrighty, ladies and gents, it is time for video lesson number 6, and today we are converting fractions to decimals. Of course, for every single video lesson, you always need the notes you were given in class. They are yellow, a pencil, a pen, highlighter, something to take notes with, and this is part of the non-calculator section, so put those calculators away, folks. Let's jump right to it because this is kind of lengthy, so we want to get through it quickly. At the very top, we have some fancy words that you need to know. These are long division vocabulary words. The first one is dividend, and that is simply the number that is being divided. It is the one inside the division house. So if you want to put a little note, put inside the house. The divisor is the number that is outside the division symbol, and it is the one doing the division. And the last one is so very important. Put a star next to this one because this one is something you're going to see all throughout middle school. It is quotient. Students like to say quotient, but it's not quotient, it's quotient, and that is the answer or solution to a division problem. So look at this example here. If you look at 16 divided by 3, in this case, 16 would have been on the top of the fraction, 3 would have been on the bottom of the fraction. So the 16 is the dividend, the divisor is 3, and the quotient or answer is 5. Look at the example on your paper, and you want to go ahead and write this in. The dividend is 16, and the divisor is 2. All right, moving down on your notes, now let's talk about some fraction vocabulary. We are coming out of our ratio unit. We've already mentioned these numerous times. We talked about that a ratio is a comparison of numbers by division because a fraction is just a division problem in disguise. Well, the numerator becomes, when we start converting to decimals, the numerator is the number, of course, above the line of the fraction, and the denominator is below the line of the fraction. In division, the numerator is the dividend, or the number that goes inside the house. We're going to talk about the top dog in class. And the denominator is the divisor, or the number outside the house, and he is the stray that has been adopted, and so he doesn't get the special treatment. So if you look at the diagram I have here on the paper, it's not in your paper, but it's on the screen. The numerator is inside the house. Top number goes inside, top dog. And then outside is the divisor or the denominator. So look at the example that's on your paper. We have 4 over 2. The 4 is the top dog, so he's going to go inside the house. And you can write this off to the right of your paper next to 4 halves. And then, of course, the 2 is the denominator. He goes outside the house because he's doing the division. If I were to divide 4 by 2, I would simply get 2, then subtract, and my answer is 0. And for all of these problems, we have to either get to a, where when we subtract we get 0, or a repeating decimal. So we're not going to stop until we get a problem either that repeats or goes to the thousands digit. All right, how do we set up our house? Let's do some practice problems. And with all of these, and whenever you're given a fraction, always remember to simplify first, because sometimes you get pretty big fractions, but you can simplify them, and then when you go to do the division, your numbers are smaller and it makes your division easier to do. So in the first example, we have 3/5. So top dog is 3. He's your numerator. He's going to go inside the house. The 5 is going to go outside the house and do the dividing. And go ahead, and whenever you're doing your division with fractions to decimals, you know it's going to become a decimal. So you're going to put a decimal behind the numerator inside the house and a 0 following that because that's where we're headed. So and then, of course, always scoop that decimal point up into your quotient or your answer so you don't forget to do it later. So in this case, 3 is getting divided by 5, but 5 can't go into 3. So then we add the decimal point and a 0, and now it's how can 30 be divided by 5? And the answer to that would be 6, or 0.6, 6/10. For the second example, we can divide, actually, it's hard to see this, you could go ahead and divide them both by 7, but the greatest common factor is actually 14. So I can go ahead and divide them by 14, and then I end up with a fraction of 1/5. And in this case, who would go in the house? The 1 goes in the house, followed by a decimal point and a 0, and the 5 is going to be on the outside of the house. And the last example, if you look at that and you think, what could I divide by? You could divide both of those by 2, you could divide them by 4, but the greatest common factor is actually 8. And if I divide those by 8, I end up getting 2/7. And in that case, 2 is going to go in the house and 7 goes on the outside of the house. And I add my decimal behind the 2 along with at least 1 0. But I will give you a hint that when you do sevenths, you will go to the thousandths place, which is 3 decimal places behind the decimal point. So you might want to give yourself a little hint. Sevenths, you always have to go out to the 3rd place behind the decimal point. All right, let's do some practice because we've set up our house, we've talked about who goes in the house, but now let's do some actual division. And here's where you're going to have to do this on your own. So the first example, I have 4/5. 4 is going to go in the division house with a decimal point and a 0, and then 5 is going to go on the outside of the house. And I'm going to go ahead and scoop my decimal point up along with a 0 in front because I cannot divide 4 by 5, or 5 doesn't go into 4. So I have to do, how many times does 5 go into 40? And the correct answer is 8. 8 times 5 is 40, and then I subtract, and I get a remainder of 0, which means my decimal stops. Once you get a remainder of 0, you're done. So my answer in this case is 8/10, and because of this, you're doing all this division and you're doing a lot of work on your paper, we're going to ask that you circle your answer so that your teacher doesn't go blind trying to find your answer. So please go ahead and circle your answer all the time. And number 2, let's jump to number 2. We have 5 divided by 8, or 5/8. 5 is going to go inside the house with a decimal point and a 0. 8 goes outside the house. And I know I cannot, 8 doesn't go into 5 because 5 is smaller than 8. So now I have to ask myself, how many times does 8 go into 50? The answer is 6. 8 times 6 is 48. I'm going to subtract, and when I subtract, I get 2. Add another 0 because I don't have a remainder of 0. So I'm going to add a 0 into my decimal inside the house, bring down that 0, and now I have to ask myself, how many times does 8 go into 20? The answer is 2. 2 times 8 is 16. Subtract 16 from 20, and I get a remainder of 4. Still not done. Got to bring down another 0. And I can keep bringing down zeros as many times as I need to get my answer. For all intents and purposes, you really only have to go 3 places behind the decimal and stop, but that's okay. So how many times does 8 go into 40? We know this from the first problem. It goes in 5 times, and 5 times 8 is 40. And when I subtract, I finally get a remainder of 0, and I can stop. So in this case, my answer is 625 thousandths. And I know you guys like to say it is 0.625, but get into the habit of saying your decimals with place value because you're going to need it later, just as a hint. Don't forget to circle your answer. Number 3. Okay, for this one, 9/12. Ooh, I think I can simplify that one. Divide them both by 3, and I get 3/4. Much easier to divide. I'm dividing now by 4 instead of dividing by 12. Helps my brain. So 3 is going to go inside the house. 4 goes outside the house. Go ahead and bring up your decimal point with a 0. and ask yourself, how many times can 4 go into 30? Closest I can get is 28, and that is 4 times 7. So 7 times 4 is 28. Subtract the 28 from 30. I get a remainder of 2. But since my remainder is not 0, got to add another 0 and bring it down. How many times does 4 go into 20? The answer is 5. So 4 times 5 is 20. And now when I subtract, ding, 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 I get 0 and I can stop. My answer would be 75 hundredths. Don't forget to circle. And now, if you flip your page over, we're going to talk about mixed numbers because they're not going to be nice and just give you fractions. You did that in 5th grade. Now they're going to throw some mixed numbers at you, and you've got to be able to convert those into decimals as well. So, first step, if you're given a mixed number, you have to turn that mixed number into an improper fraction. And I'll show you a trick. I call it the magic C. You draw the C by touching the denominator to the numerator, and that reminds you to multiply the denominator times the whole number. 4 times 2 is 8, and then you add 8, that product or that answer, to the numerator. So 8 plus 1 would give me 9. And then your denominator simply stays the same as it was. So in this case, I had 4 on the bottom. That 4 just slides back over into my denominator and stays the same. So 2 1/4 is really the same as 9 over 4. And then once I have 9 over 4, I still go back and I use the long division to divide the numerator by the denominator. The only difference is when you have a mixed number, and you may want to write this in your notes, if you're starting with a mixed number, you are going to have a whole number in front of your decimal point, and that whole number is going to match whatever your whole number was in front of your fraction is going to be the same in front of your decimal. So let's do some practice. I do have an example over here on the right of your notes, but let's go ahead and practice doing some conversions from a mixed number into an improper fraction first, and then we'll throw it all together and do the division. So on number 1, we have 1 3/4. So I'm going to draw the magic C, multiply 4 times 1, and that gives me 4, plus 3 gives me 7. And then that 4 just comes over and stays 4. So 1 3/4 is really the same as 7 over 4. Now let's look at number 2, the second example. Draw your magic C. You're going to multiply 8 times 3, which is 24. Add 24 plus 2, and that gives me 26. And my denominator was 8, ding, 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 and it stays 8 in my new problem. Okay, let's look down at the bottom of your page. We've got 4 more examples to do, and then we'll be done. Okay, for number 3, we have 1/5. 1 goes inside the house. 5 goes on the outside. Don't forget to bring up, because my numerator is smaller than my denominator, I'm going to go ahead and bring up a 0 and a decimal point so that I'm ready to do my division. 5 goes into 10 2 times. 5 times 2 is 10. When I subtract, I get a remainder of 0, so I am done. My answer is 2/10. Don't forget to circle. For number 4, we have 3/10. And technically, because you just read that as 3/10, couldn't you just write that as a decimal? Oh yeah, if you know how to write 3/10 as a decimal, you can go ahead and take that shortcut. That's having math sense. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, let's go ahead and do the math. 3 is going to go inside your division house. 10 is on the outside. I'm going to go ahead and bring up a 0 in my decimal point, and now it's ready to divide. 10 goes into 30 3 times. 3 times 10 is 30. Subtract that, and you get a remainder of 0. Ding, ding, ding. My answer is 3/10, and this is what I was talking about. The fraction is read as 3/10, or 3 instead of 3 over 10, and the decimal is also 3/10. So with tenths, you can read it and know how to write it as a decimal without having to do all that division. And you don't have to do the division if you can explain why you can write it that way. Okay, last two examples. These are both mixed numbers, so we have to do the magic C to convert them. So let's do the first example. 2 times 7 equals 14 plus 1 is 15 over 2. And we're going to go ahead and divide. 15 goes in the house, 2 is on the outside, and like I said before, you're going to have a whole number in front of your decimal point, so don't put the 0 first. 2 goes into 15 7 times. Notice my 7 in front of the decimal point is the same as my whole number in front of my fraction. And then once I do that multiplication, I get 14. I have one remainder. Bring down your 0. 2 goes into 10 5 times. That gives me a remainder of 0 once I subtract. Very good. Okay, my answer is 7.5 or 7.5. And then the last example, let's go ahead and do our magic C. 8 times 5 is 40, plus 1 is 41. 8 stays my denominator. We're going to put 41 on the inside of the house. 8 is on the outside of the house. And again, we're going to have a whole number in front, so don't put a 0. 8 goes into 41 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40. Then I'm going to subtract and have 1 left over. Bring down your 0. 8 goes into 10 1 time. That gives me a remainder of 2, but I can't stop. Got to bring down another 0. 8 goes into 20 2 times. That gives me 16. Subtract again. I get 4 as a remainder. Bring down one more 0 because I know that 8 is going to go into 40 5 times. And then when I subtract, I have a remainder of 0 and I can stop. So in this case, my answer is 5 and 125 thousandths. And don't forget to circle. Now it's time to show what you know. Don't forget to log in and take your homework quiz.